Welcome to A Different Frame. I'm your co-host, Anisha.
And I'm Kendra.
So this is a podcast for the people, by the people. Now, this show is made possible by Alabama Values Progress, a media advocacy organization dedicated to breaking the cycle of misinformation during the times where the truth is pretty much hard to find. So we're out here delivering facts, data, and receipts on what's happening in Alabama. I am super excited to be back for season 2. It feels good to be back, right, Kendra?
Yes.
So in today's episode, we're going to be talking to two dynamic women. Today's episode is titled Abort the Patriarchy. So Kendra, why don't you tell everybody what's on tap for today?
Yeah, so today we'll be exploring the most pressing issues surrounding reproductive health and rights today in the U.S., particularly in Alabama in a post-roe world. And y'all, I'm super excited. Today we're joined by two individuals who are all about that abort the patriarchy, it's my body period life. We have Jen Ferris, who is the National Advocacy Director for ProgressNow with us. She is a third-generation feminist activist who has been working for more than a decade to advance reproductive rights and access. And we also have Jenice Fountain, who's the Executive Director of Yellowhammer Fund. She's a grassroots organizer and reproductive justice advocate. She's a mom herself, and she's the founder of Margins, Women Helping Black Women, a local community aid organization that addresses the reproductive, financial, and material needs of low-income Black mothers and their children. Super, super awesome organization. And y'all, I am so excited about this conversation. Yeah. I just want to take the time to give a quick shout out to our sister organization, Alabama Values, who has been doing some pretty awesome things since the overturning of Roe v. Wade. They've been facilitating some pretty important conversations across the state through their campaign, It's My Body Period. They've been collaborating with other reproductive justice and advocacy organizations, and they've been doing some pretty unique things with programming such as film and discussions, social media campaigns, and some really awesome pop-up events.
So for those of you who are wondering, how do we get here? Like houseway in 2023, are there laws on the books controlling what I can and can't do with my uterus? So despite the Supreme Court's landmark decision in Roe v. Wade, which happened decades ago in 1973, which legalized abortion nationwide, we have seen a collective, persistent, consistent, concentrated effort by anti-choice activists, lawmakers that have been chipping away at our reproductive rights, y'all, in the recent years. And unfortunately, this past summer, we saw the reversal of Roe v. Wade. We've seen restrictive laws across the country, including so-called heartbeat laws, fetal burial laws. In Alabama, we've reverted back to, Alabama's pre-Roe abortion ban, which makes abortion illegal except to preserve, the life of a woman. This statute carries a maximum of 12 months in jail and a fine up to $1,000. In addition, we saw our neighboring states have abortion laws that will or have already, gone into effect, which has made it, it further limits Alabamians' ability to travel outside of the state to receive, an abortion. Again, this has been a decade-long attack on reproductive rights. It's just unfortunate.
Yeah, Anisha, this is just sad and outright frightening. And y'all, I don't even have words for this. Alabama already had the third highest maternal mortality rate in the nation prior to the overturning of Roe. And now I just don't know what it's going to be now that we have this post-Roe world, especially with there being so many laws that are having a devastating impact on people's reproductive health and their well-being. Yeah. So with that being said, I want to put a question out there for you, Janae. What impact do you see the types of restrictions and laws having on people's reproductive health and well-being?
There's so many different impacts, but what I do like to always say before we have the conversation is very much so a death threat. It's not something that we can take lightly. It's not an inconvenience. It's not a toothache. It's very much so a death threat to marginalized folks. There's so many impacts, right? Because the access to abortion could definitely define the trajectory of your life or the lack thereof. So you might be able to get an abortion when you're in college because you're not ready. You need to finish out your college degree, but now you can't. So the likelihood that you might have to drop out of college the likelihood that you'll be catapulted into poverty or even deeper into poverty that you're already experiencing, the likelihood that you'll be criminalized, right? Because some people are going to try to get around it and don't have the access to do so and will be criminalized after that. Or even just people that are carrying pregnancies that might miscarriage, right? Because we're dealing with healthcare that's from the state. Most of us don't have PCPs. We're just dealing with whatever we can afford with whatever the state offers. And so in that case, we don't have a primary care physician to say, oh, I think you may have miscarried or believe what we're saying. We have to deal with anyone's perception of us. And we already know about the medical bias that we're engaging with already. And so it's like when we have this conversation and we're saying that we're sad, I'm sad, but I'm furious. This is very much so a death threat for folks in this state. And it's an intentional one, right? Because we know who this disproportionately impacts. So it's a death threat when you ask what the impact is. The impact is death. We're looking at a state with horrible maternal and infant mortality and morbidity rates as it is. And that's also a state that's attacking midwifery as well. So it's like when we see people step out and make these extra steps and things to keep us alive, we also see the state attack them as well. So when we talk about it, we do have to talk about it in the sense of it being an intentional attack on marginalized people.
Yeah. I mean, when you put it that way, Jenice, I mean, you said death threat, but if someone like threatened to slap me, I'm hot. I'm ready, So when you say, look, this is like attack on people's lives. And I think that's important for us to frame this fight, that way. I don't think people realize, I think they miss those numbers that, the mortality rate, that this, the impact that this will have. So, Jen, I know that Jen, not Jenice, Jen, I know that you bring, the work that you do, you bring a more national, lens to the fight because you work around the country. What are some of the trends that you're seeing, in terms of the narrative around the reproductive rights fight and abortion? When we look at like these culture wars and we look at how the media frames this and how this shapes public opinion. And as we know, public opinion can impact public policy. But like, what are some of the trends that you're seeing in terms of the narrative around the reproductive fight?
Thanks for asking that. I think we've definitely seen a shift, and I have to say it can be a little frustrating as someone who's been in the movement for a while because we've all known the truth for a long time. And it took a crisis to push kind of the general public to a point where they were paying attention to abortion and prioritizing it in their lives. I feel like as recently as like 5 years ago, people thought that the fact of abortion was a marginalized issue. It was not an issue that was for them or for their lives. And with these attacks, we're understanding, unfortunately, we all, Jenice and I, and you two all understood this already, but the general public is really joining the conversation about intersectionality and the role that having bodily autonomy plays in one's life. But I also, because I really like to bring the joy, I am very sad and angry, just to reflect what Jenice said. This is awful, but I also don't want the extremists and bad guys to take away our joy. And in what I think is a pretty tremendous moment for the country, there's been a lot of expansion of abortion rights as well, concurrent with them leaving. 14 states expanded their abortion rights in the last year. 27 municipalities passed ordinances protecting abortion clinics, expanding funding for abortion. So the United States is a study in contrast. In Alabama, y'all are at rock bottom. My hope and anticipation is that this is a rubber band, and that as we've pulled so far away from our basic freedoms and the freedoms of everybody, that eventually that will snap back to a place, we will all fight together to force it to snap back to a place where these freedoms are not just doomed to exist, but prioritized. Because what I want to say is, you mentioned Roe versus Wade in the beginning in your intro, and like, it was devastating. The Dobbs decision was devastating. But I also want to say there was a part of Roe that was holding our movement back. We were having to circle around what was basically the baseline of rights. We weren't allowed to, we continue not to be allowed to have public funding for abortion. There are a lot of rights that are denied to us. And for many, many years, almost 50 years, we sat back on our laurels and said, we have Roe, we don't need to do more. And so my hope and dream is that now that we have moved away from this Roe framework, that we can expand what reproductive freedom means to us and really make laws, make freedoms, and make access that actually meets the needs of the people who have abortions. And that means our LGBT brothers and sisters, that means our Black and brown brothers and sisters, that is everybody who deserves access, not just the people who 10 years ago that Roe protected.
Yeah, no, and you make some great points, particularly, about the intersectionality, like the intersection of reproductive rights with issues such as race, class, and sexuality, and how those can have like significant, impacts on individuals' access to reproductive health care, and not just reproductive health care, but just the quality of health care, period. Historically, marginalized communities have faced systemic barriers to accessing not just reproductive health care, but quality health care through discriminatory practices, and we've seen these barriers lead to disparities in health outcomes. Jenice, when you talk about this being, a death threat, right? And then also, Jen, you hit on a narrative and voices that we aren't elevating in this fight. When we talk about individuals with intersecting identities who may face unique challenges related to their reproductive health. How when we think of reproductive justice, we tend to center women. And this has been a conversation, as our sister org have been hosting events through their It's My Body Period initiative. A lot of the reproductive justice partners that they're partnering with have been elevating the need to not just center, women, but there are voices that are missing, whether it's the trans community that are missing from this fight. So I want to put this question out to, just to everyone, let's talk a little bit about, what role does race, class, and sexuality play, in this fight?
I think I agree with what Jen mentioned about Roe being a baseline. And I think, in the same way that we always knew it wasn't enough, right? Like we knew people still couldn't access it. We knew that it wasn't affordable for some folks. We knew that folks still couldn't fathom getting an abortion at some stages of their life. I think in that same way, after losing Roe, we have to stay on that contingent of knowing that people are going to get left out. Because that's how a lot of organizations pivot to getting people across state lines. And that's great, and that's radical, and that's necessary. But some people are not going to do that. Like some people are not going to go across state lines. Some folks haven't left Alabama. And so I think the same way that people focused on legality, which left marginalized folks out, they're doing it in a different way now. Some folks aren't. We can always uplift people that are doing the work in a very intersectional way. But we're also still looking at that same theme, right? People say, oh, well, we can get people across state lines. Some people can't get on flights. Undocumented people probably don't want to go across state lines. They don't want to risk it. Disabled people don't want to go across state lines. Queer and trans folks probably have one safe space that they know in the state, much less outside of the state. And while when we have conversations like this and we say things that are very much so gender, like women, or even just women and men, or brothers and sisters, and we leave out non-binary folks, I think it just further pushes the narrative that this is a one-dimensional issue. And so I think we've had some people at Yellowhammer Fund reach out and say, why do y'all keep saying birthing people? Why are y'all saying folks? We've gotten dissertations about inclusivity, but one thing about it is that us using neutral language isn't leaving anyone out. When we say birthing folks, that's also it's for everyone that can birth, right? And it's a necessary thing. And that's how those little things of practicing how we share space matter, because people need to know where they can go, where they can have the conversations. And we can't skip over that. We're not just dealing with it being illegal. We're also dealing with medical bias as well, right? So now we might be forced to birth, and now we're going to deal with the medical bias there. Or if we get to a clinic, we're guys, I'm sorry, we're probably still dealing with a lot of medical bias, even in abortion clinics. Like, we have to have a conversation about
absolutely
how we show up in space, because it's not enough to make sure someone can get somewhere if they're not safe when they get there.
To echo what Jenice said, is that leaving people out is never the right answer. And I want to name the fact that I've worked in communications and political communications for a long time. And for a long time, we have prioritized like expeditious language over people first language. And so there's been a lot of infighting, and there's been a lot of words about saying birthing bodies and all that. There's people who say it's too complicated to say people who have abortions or whatever. And the fact is, it's not. It's just not something we were used to previously. And just as Jenice said, the folks who are most benefited by inclusive language are the folks who really need it. Even in a perfect world where everything, just as to reflect what Jenice said, even if legality is there, in a very perfect world, access is not there, and it's complicated. And so what we can do as allies and advocates is prioritizing the people and not falling victim to expeditious language just because we think it sounds better on a press release.
Yes.
I'll also say, because I do every time, right, that I would only hope that this actually pushes people to actually being pro-bodily autonomy. Because usually when people say that in this movement, that means that they hope that people can get to abortion. And we really, especially as abortion funds, as previous abortion funds or advocates, have to name what that narrative does to folks, because there's a lot of abortion funds that pushed abortion on folks that would have birthed otherwise, or won't even acknowledge, right, those other decisions around birthing. And I don't think people want to engage with abortion funds that conduct themselves in that way. I'll always be pro-abortion. I'm always team forget those kids. I corrected the words for your video. But it's just very necessary to actually support bodily autonomy. And even if it's not people choosing to birth because they want to, even if it's because they can't get across state lines, like, we have to reckon with that now, right? Like, people are being forced into birthing. As someone that's pro bodily autonomy, okay, they didn't make it across the state lines. What now?
Yeah.
And we can't force people to rely on CPCs, crisis pregnancy centers, because they're terrible. And the resources that they have come at a cost. That's usually your dignity, your integrity, right? So it's just necessary, especially in this post-roe world, to actually have a framework that's inclusive of people that are going to be forced into birthing.
Yeah.
Thank y'all so much for that insight. And that was a really great conversation. So Jenice, Yellowhammer Fund's overall mission is to meet the needs of those living in or traveling to Alabama for reproductive health care needs. And I know you all have been on the ground by offering reproductive health services and assistance and coordination and material support and assistance for low-income families in need. And y'all are also creating a pipeline for others to join in the fight through your programs, such as your Catalyst Fund. So how are you and your team thinking about next steps as you work to meet the needs and fill those gaps that the reversal of Roe will widen? And how can people tap into and support the efforts that you all are doing?
So I will say that our emergency contraceptive program has about 8,000 orders right now. So we'll definitely be hosting some EC packing parties, safer sex packing parties. But I think that was our bigger program coming into Roe. And I don't think we anticipated it being at 8,000 orders after lifting it up. So that's a really easy, for some, tasks to lift. Like, we just compact it. We'll stick shipping labels on it and send it out. That's on our website, so people can get it free, and it's really discreet sending. But since last year, we've really tried to look at what more can we do. We've come up with some really good plans, like our Catalyst for Reproductive Justice sub-grants. We supported some folks through our maternal health work because, like I said, it's going to be very forced birthing. And we intentionally supported people that we knew facilitated conversations with folks that included abortion still. Like, we included folks that were safe spaces for the full spectrum of the conversation, because there's not that many places in Alabama where we could still go and talk about abortion freely and not worry about criminalization. We have our fellowship now that is very much so for facilitating conversation. We have a sex ed week, a self-managed abortion week, legal landscape, and maternal health. But more than having the conversation, we really structured it as the starting point of creating hubs. So all the fellows that are in the fellowship now will become a hub. They have emergency contraceptives that we've given them, safer sex kits, all the information around self-managing, all the legal information. So we're just trying to put as many people in as many places as possible that can have conversations in a safe way and that can give information to their communities in a way that reaches them, right? Because we know that some folks have better relationships with the folks next door than they do to someone that's at an organization. And we don't want people to have to find Yellowhammer Fund to be empowered. We want people to have what they need with them and have that power and that push to be able to empower the next person, or if nothing else, just keep them safe. So I think that's one of our bigger pushes this year as a fellowship, because we'll be revisiting in a few months and restocking everybody and keeping those hubs active. And we'll look to do it again next year. We also have our legal fund that's going to get announced this year because, like I said, legalization in Alabama is
they wilding. They wilding.
It's very serious.
Yeah.
We're going to tell people to go across state lines. Like, we have to have some amount of a safety net, right? If we get you across state line and you get caught, then what? So we have a few more things, and I think Kelsey told me I couldn't say the big ones, so
okay,
try not to do that one. But mostly the hubs. I'm looking forward to the hubs the most because we just got to get people everywhere with the conversation. I think the state is relying on us being scared of even saying abortion or having a conversation at all, and so we have to go ahead and tackle that.
Yeah. No, shout out to, you know what I'm saying, Jenice, you and your team over at Yellowhammer Fund. I mean, because what a way to create an entry point for people to get involved in the fight, but not only get involved, also equipping them with resources and knowledge to deploy within communities that they are already trusted messengers in. That's the approach, right? So I love how you said, look, your neighbor is your neighbor. Here's some stuff to help them out. So I love that. I love that approach.
Yeah. Thanks, Jenice, for all your hard work you're doing. I really, really appreciate the fellowship program. I'm a fellow, and I think we've already had some really, really amazing conversations in the first week that we were doing the fellowship. And I think that it's really going to, make a really big impact. But anyway, as a media advocacy organization, AVP is always looking for ways to give folks opportunities to tap in and get involved where they feel led, because we're really big on the power of the collective. So Jen, you're doing a lot of work around the country. Who are some other orgs that are doing impactful work to fill in the gaps?
That's a really good question. And I think there are a lot of national orgs, but I really do want to focus on Yellowhammer. I know we have Jenice here, but not only is Yellowhammer Fund Alabama's abortion fund, it's also one of the leaders in the country in terms of advocacy, in terms of just really leading the abortion fight. And so if you're not completely plugged into the Yellowhammer Fund yet, and Jenice, I'm sorry to be talking for you, but I'm just even from a national lens, the Yellowhammer Fund is so special, y'all. And being in Alabama, y'all might not know that because it's yours, but we all see it, and it's very important to the whole national the whole national vision. I will also say If, When, How, which is a legal advocacy organization. Their tagline is Lawyering for Reproductive Justice. They are really important in this moment as criminalization is happening, and we're criminalizing both patients and doctors and people who are traveling. And so thinking about If, When, How, and how they are backing folks up. The National Network of Abortion Funds goes without saying, because we just mentioned Yellowhammer Fund. And there's a lot of ways to get abortion medication. Aid access is one, but and Jenice, please do fill in if there's some others that you'd like to shout out. But anybody who is doing mutual aid, who is doing direct service to the patients is really who you need to support right now. I do work for a national organization, and I do come from a national lens. And I can tell you, if you want to be donating money, if you want to be volunteering, these big national groups are kind of not it. You really need to get on the ground with your local funds, with your local mutual aid. That's where the real difference happens, free of the bureaucracy and free of a lot of the constraints that take over giant, big national organizations.
And that's a conversation.
I could do that all day.
Like we can talk about, that's a conversation in itself. But no, thanks, Jen. You make some great points, and definitely about working on the ground. You know, since the reversal of Roe, policy advocates and organizers, they have been working on strategies around steps that can be taken, you know, now as we move forward to expand and protect, you know, reproductive rights in the U.S., you know, whether it's, you know, electing pro-choice leaders, supporting pro-choice policies at, you know, all levels of government, or increasing access to comprehensive sexual and reproductive health care, you know, similar to the work that the Yellowhammer Fund is doing in Alabama, or, you know, similar to the work that, you know, we're doing over at ABP or our sister org at Alabama Values in terms of educating and engaging the public around the importance of reproductive rights and freedoms. I wanted to put something out there, you know, just a question, you know, is there hope? Right? I know, Jen, you started speaking to that. Like, where do you all see us on this journey? Right? What are some of the things that you believe we must start now to put us on like the best path, you know, back to expanding, you know, reproductive rights?
I'm sure Jenna have the more answer. So I will say that I do think that while legislation obviously plays a massive role in what people engage in and how they engage, I think we get our power from movements. Mm-hmm. I always point to Roe wasn't overturned overnight. Yep. Because I know people want this thing to happen and then we're back, and that's just not how it works. So if you're really dedicated to the work, then you have to be dedicated to it being a process. But I do think there's probably going to be a reckoning with this. It won't just be all the nice, you know, telling your horror story to your legislators. They already know. And so it's like, what do we do after that? Like, what does reckoning with a death threat look like? Because I don't think fighting a death threat looks like us sharing trauma porn with our legislators. So I think this is a bigger conversation. I'm really interested to see where Jen stands on this.
That was I'm a little tense answering that now. So I agree completely, Jenice. This is a reckoning, right? Like, reckoning is exactly the right word. Is there hope tomorrow? No. Is there hope in 3 weeks? No. Is there hope in 10 years? Yeah. And the way I can define hope if I'm having a good day is that I look at how people are helping each other and about the information that's being shared, and all those networks that already existed pre-abortion ban that are being enhanced and are being brought together. I think about Jenice talking about the morning after pill. I'm sorry, please fill in. The
emergency contraceptives?
Thank you. I just had a moment. The emergency contraception groups that like are providing that. So you have 8,000 people who are going to get emergency contraception from you, right? Like that brings me hope, because I got to tell you, and this is going to be a little not controversial, but honestly, sorry, is in 2007 when I worked for Planned Parenthood, we couldn't have any of these conversations. We couldn't say like how can we help each other? What communities can we build? And so while it's a giant step back, the hope I find is in the communities that are being built, and that in the imaginative ideas beyond the law, beyond the basics of what the government can give them, and really enhancing and growing those networks.
Awesome.
So thank you, Jenice and Jen, for joining us today and offering your valuable insight on reproductive justice in Alabama and across the country. This is a really awesome conversation.
Yes, but wait, before y'all go, y'all got to get on the soapbox. So the soapbox is new this season. The soapbox is the place where you get to rant for 60 seconds. 60 seconds or under. I mean, it can be about this topic. It can be about how you're feeling coming away from talking about this topic. Feel free to tear a hole in whoever or whatever. Just keep it clean because the kids are listening. But yes, they listen and they're watching, which they should be, because they need to be educated on these topics. But so who wants to volunteer to get on the soapbox first? Yes, Jenice. All right. So in 3 seconds, you're going to be able to step on the soapbox. You're going to be spotlighted. And go.
Y'all, in 2023, at this big age, stop gifting your legislators ignorance. Stop gifting your crappy friends ignorance. Stop gifting folks ignorance. They know. We don't have to give them a sob story. They already know. And at this point in time in this movement, if you're claiming to know who's disproportionately impacted, please let your work reflect that. It is not enough for you to get on multiple platforms, news outlets, and say buzzwords like who's disproportionately impacted. We know marginalized folks are at the bottom of this, or at the most vulnerable in this movement. What does your work look like that reflects that you know that? What are you going to do? What is the action? How do you take action? What are you going to do now that you've said that you know? How does your action reflect that?
All right then. Jen, look, are you ready to get up there, Jen?
Okay, here we go.
All right, go.
I'm going to try to keep this as clean as possible, but here's the truth, is that we as organisms on this earth were put here to try to reproduce. Abortion is just a part of life that is one of the parts that comes from us being living organisms. Sex is part of life. Consequences is a horrible word, but outcomes from sex are a normal thing. Being precious about sex, gatekeeping information about sex, keeping folks from having sex ed, all of that contributes to kind of a culture of violence against people who can have sex, who can birth, who are affected by these things. And so the way forward truly is to give up on the stigma around sex and around abortion, see the world for what it really is, encounter the world for what it really is, be true about your values, and stop being manipulated by people who want you to believe things are controversial when they're not.
All right, look, you all said that. I know. Round of applause.
Yes.
We know. So, okay. So to our listeners and viewers, you may be wondering how you can stay connected, get involved, stay informed around the fight for reproductive justice and other social issues. So definitely tune in to future A Different Frame episodes. The podcast is streaming on all platforms, and you can catch, the video version, aka the podcast, on social media platforms at Alabama Values Progress or our website, alabamavaluesprogress.org. So follow, subscribe, and share to stay connected with the latest news and updates regarding issues in Alabama, and to connect with our partner organizations that are on the ground working to build a more equitable, sustainable Alabama. So we'll be dropping some information. Stay tuned after this video if you want to follow up with the Yellowhammer Fund, if you want to follow up with Jen and organizations that she's working with, and also just some of our partner organizations who are working with our sister org, Alabama Values, around their It's My Body Period campaign. We want to make sure we keep y'all connected. So stay tuned. And if you're listening, go ahead and check us out on social to get some more information. And that's a wrap. Bye.
Bye.